Hi, welcome to Tour with Lisa. I'm Lisa and this is a virtual tour of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Now, this memorial sits at West Potomac Park, which is just across from the National Mall. In fact, there's 3 memorials that are in this location. This memorial was the inspiration of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Thomas Jefferson was one of his heroes. He admired him very much. He'd read a lot of books about him. And so he presented this idea to Congress and they first rejected it. But it eventually came around, obviously, because we do have a memorial there. They even allotted $3 million to build the memorial. So the construction begins and it's going to face a few controversies. So it's 1939. The location that they've chosen is the tidal basin of West Potomac Park, and there are already hundreds of cherry blossom trees there. These were a gift to us from Japan back in 1912. So that's our first controversy. We're going to have protesters that don't want these cherry trees to come down. It's a group of women, about 50 women from garden clubs across the DC area. So they began chaining themselves to the trees. They stand in front of the bulldozers and they even try to shovel back in the dirt that has already been removed. Well, the construction does continue, and in the long run, we actually end up planting more trees than we took out. So I think it was a win-win situation. So by 1941, we have entered World War II, and this presents us with our next controversy, which is going to be the fact that we are spending money on a memorial. Well, actually, the money had already been allotted for the memorial in the first place, but to calm the nation in FDR's very fatherly, I'm going to calm you type of way, he presents us as, we are giving people jobs. People are making money building this memorial. And also it is a very important reminder of our democracy, as Thomas Jefferson is one of the founding fathers and also the main author of the Declaration of Independence. So the memorial is completed in 1943 and FDR is going to be at that dedication ceremony. Also at that dedication ceremony is one of the original Declaration of Independence, a copy of the Declaration of Independence, which is the copy that is now on display at the National Archives. The Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, and the Gutenberg Bible were taken away when we entered war, and they were hidden for safekeeping at an undisclosed location. Well, now that it's been like behind us, I can tell you where that location was. They took it to the Bullion Depository at Fort Knox, Kentucky. So it was in a bulletproof glass, steel encased box, and it was guarded 24 hours a day. I think it was on display for just a few days, but the U.S. Marine Corps was there to guard it 24 hours a day, which is kind of interesting. And FDR gave his speech. Now the statue that is inside the memorial is not the original statue. That the sculptor of the statue was a man named Rudolph Evans, who had won a design competition. But because of the war, they built a plaster statue and they painted it to look bronze because we were having to preserve all the metal for the war cause. I've often wondered whatever happened to that statue. It was probably maybe torn down and destroyed. I often wonder when I'm there if maybe it's at the bottom of the tidal basin. I don't know. If you know where it is, leave it in the comments below and let me know. Now, the outside of the memorial was designed by John Russell Pope, who was a very prominent architect of the day. In fact, he designed the National Archives, he designed the DAR building there in Washington, D.C., and he also did a lot of the Vanderbilt homes. So he was well known at the time. It's a classical style. There's a dome featured on top of it, and I'll explain that in a minute. Inside, there's some walls circular walls that have quotes from some of his writings. And the statue of Thomas Jefferson is depicted of him at age 43. He's wearing a coat by General Kosciuszko, who was one of the generals that came to America to help us win the Revolutionary War. He's holding in his hand a document which is presumed to be the Declaration of Independence. He's looking directly at the White House because there is a cutout through the trees and you can see the White House. Also, if you're in the White House, you can see Thomas Jefferson. So I like to think Thomas Jefferson is keeping an eye on the White House. Now, Thomas Jefferson was our third president. He was our second vice president. He was our first Secretary of State. And before that, he was the ambassador to France. So he spent about 5 years in France before we even had our government formed over here. So he was many, many things, Thomas Jefferson. He was an avid lifelong learner. He could speak 4 languages and he could read and write in 2 other languages. So he had a total of 6 languages under his belt. He was an experimental farmer, trying new and different crops. He was an attorney by trade. He had studied at William and Mary, and some say that he spent 15 hours a day in study while he was in college. He was also a wine connoisseur. And when he came back from France, because he was a foodie, he brought back with him French fries, ice cream, and mac and cheese, which have now been popularized in America as American food. And as I mentioned that he was an architect, he loved the classical design. And so the dome that you see on the memorial at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial is also on his home, Monticello, which is just outside Charlottesville, Virginia. He's also the founder of the University of Virginia, and there is also a dome on that. He spent years remodeling his home. He'd build it and he didn't like it, and then he'd redo it. So it was like constantly under construction. And when he was buried, because his grave is at Monticello, he had some conditions, and he said, because by these, as testimonials that I have lived, I wish most to be remembered. And this is what it says on his tombstone. Here is buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence and the Statute of Virginia Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Nowhere on this tomb does it mention that he was president of the United States. So I think that the thing he was most proud of was writing the Declaration of Independence. And when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, there was the Committee of 5 that worked on this project. Even though Jefferson was the main author, the other members were editing it and taking things out, adding things in, which didn't make Thomas Jefferson very happy. But one of the things that they took out was a clause where he was wanting to abolish slavery. And the Founding Fathers felt like that we aren't ready for that yet. Let's save that for the next generation, because right now the most important thing is to gain our freedom from Great Britain. So throughout Thomas Jefferson's life, he was an advocate of abolishing slavery. Now, I know that is contradictory because he had slaves, but he called slavery a moral depravity and a hideous blot. He even worked on some documents that to try to abolish slavery. One of them was in 1778. He drafted a Virginia law that prohibited the importation of enslaved Africans. And in 1784, he proposed an ordinance that would ban slavery in the Northwest Territories. So another thing that he did was, like I told you before, he was an experimental farmer. So he tried to get Virginians to change the crops that they grew, specifically tobacco, because it was labor intensive. And so he was trying to think of crops like wheat, sugar maple, short-grained rice, olive trees, wine and grapes, crops that weren't as labor intensive because of having to be harvested by the slaves. So I know that, and today I know that's very controversial. Well, why did he have slaves? And it would be a huge change of life, and I don't know why he was conflicted on that and why he couldn't have done more to to end it, but do know that he did publicly try to make some changes to abolish slavery. And he felt like that if we were ever going to get it abolished, that it would probably have to be through a great civil war that would divide the union of the country. And of course, he was right. So that is a little bit about Thomas Jefferson and the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. I know when you go there, you will be awe-inspired because it is such a beautiful memorial and it's located very beautifully as well. So thanks for watching Tour with Lisa. I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.